Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Chamber's final membership meeting program for 2020. Today's program will be a preview of what we might expect to see during the 2021 Oregon legislative session and from the United States Congress. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge and welcome two new Chamber members, Matrix Business Resources Incorporated and Weiss Dermatology. Please check out the Chamber newsletter online for more details about these Chamber businesses. Membership meetings are possible through the generosity of our member sponsors. We would like to thank Pacific Power for its longtime support of our November program. As most of you know, Pacific Power has served Douglas County since 1961 and is an incredible example of a business organization that supports the growth and success of our community. Pacific Power serves more than 40,000 customers in Douglas County, working to meet growing energy demand while protecting the environment and planning for the future by developing renewable energy resources and regional transmission projects. As part of PacifiCorp, the company has a generating capacity of nearly 11,000 megawatts of power from thermal, hydro, wind, and geothermal facilities, purchasing additional energy as needed. Pacific Power holds the largest hydroelectric project on the North Umpqua River, which, besides producing emission-free power, has a renowned salmon and steelhead passage facility that reconnects those migrating species to historic spawning grounds. Additionally, the company is a national leader in developing other renewable energy resources and, as part of PacifiCorp, is the second largest utility owner of wind generation in the United States. Protecting and enhancing the environment is at the forefront of Pacific Power's business strategy, which also includes initiatives related to energy efficiency. As a Pacific Power customer in Oregon, you can take advantage of Energy Trust of Oregon services and cash incentives to improve home energy efficiency. Please visit www.energytrust.org to find out more information. It seems so understated to say 2020 has been a year of COVID, civil discord, devastating wildfires, a statewide and national election, all of which will impact 2021 and, specifically for today's program, what businesses can expect to see legislatively from Salem and Washington, D.C. Today, we have two distinguished presenters who have feet on the ground in these political areas. Up first to share insights into Oregon's 2021 legislative session is J.L. Wilson. J.L. heads up Public Affairs Council in Salem and is a legislative lead for the Oregon State Chamber of Commerce. J.L. comes with more than 20 years in public affairs and lobbying as past executive director of NFIB Oregon and past senior vice president of government affairs for Associated Oregon Industries. He has been a full-time lobbyist representing primarily business interests since 2000, with a long-standing relationship with the chambers throughout the state of Oregon. Just a reminder, if you have questions for JL, to type them in the chat, and after the completion of his presentation, I will ask the questions aloud for all attendees to hear. With that, please join me in welcoming J.L. Wilson.
Talk a little bit about the 2021 legislature and what to expect. So the 2020 elections, believe it or not, are not quite yet resolved. I do believe the Senate races are completely resolved. And in the Senate races, there were a handful of very competitive races that were basically fought to a draw. So going into the election cycle, Democrats held an 18-12 majority in the Senate, and coming out of the elections, the 18-12 majority is what they will continue to have. There were a handful of races on the coast and in Bend and in Salem and in East Multnomah County, and again, all basically fought to a standstill. We expect, in fact, now we know that Senate leadership will be the same as last year, which means Peter Courtney will be the Senate president, and the officers still remain the same. The difference is really going to be where Betsy Johnson is on tax issues. It is clear that her Senate district is now basically turned into a red district. I don't think that she'll, it'll be interesting if she supplies any tax votes this year. She was a key figure in passing some taxes, including the corporate activities tax in 2019. It'll be interesting now that Senate district is clearly gone from blue to red over the past couple of years. The House races are still, believe it or not, unresolved. There is one outstanding race that is down to 51 votes. Going into the election cycle, Democrats held a 38-22 majority. As of right now, they hold a 37-23 majority, with the possibility that Republicans could pick up an additional seat in House District 52, as the incumbent Democrat Representative Anna Williams is clinging to a 51 vote lead over Jeff Helfrich. And the counties involved, which are Clackamas, Hood River, and the easternmost portions of Multnomah, which, believe it or not, are actually heavily red. All signature verification issues need to be cured by the end of tomorrow, the 17th, at which case we will know the winner. Interesting, on election day, that race was about 3,000 votes apart, and as additional votes were counted over time, it is now down to 51 votes. And so my guess is that Anna Williams will likely narrowly hold on, but it will be interesting, and we should know final results by Wednesday the 18th. But I would not say that this election was a disruptive election. It could potentially be disruptive if Helfrich were to actually prevail by a few votes, because then Democrats would have the bare supermajority at 36. And interestingly enough, there is some, I would say, discord in the House Democratic caucus, which will make for some interesting issues of cohesion, and whether that caucus is able to steamroll like they have for the last couple of cycles. But as it stands now, I do not think that the election was a disruptive election. It's largely business as usual. The only real flips that occurred, the coastal communities of the North Coast and South Coast just culturally have changed, basically from blue to red. And then conversely, the suburbs, the Portland suburbs that used to be reliably red, have now really flipped and are now blue. So you've seen some cultural shifts that are starting to manifest in election results. But still, kind of a business as usual. I don't think anybody won a particular mandate coming out of the 2020 election. So let's talk a little bit about OSCC, the State Chamber of Commerce, and what we're really organized to do. And we're organized to be a grassroots organization to leverage the power of the 85 chambers who are under the OSCC umbrella, and the 26,000 companies that are represented by our network of chambers, and really to bring the voice of Main Street business to bear on issues of importance to business. Obviously, we're not a major player in the elections. Certainly hope to change that over time. Our real bread and butter is bringing voices to bear in the legislative and now regulatory process. And I would just call, some, quick facts about our effectiveness, just so you have some background. If you remember the cap and trade issue of 2019 and 2020, OSCC was probably the largest generator of comment on that issue. We generated 13,192 responses from 6,200 individual authentic businesses on that issue, and really, I think, had a big influence on how that policy was able to be curbed. More recently, with the big action to date from a regulatory point of view has been with OSHA over the past several months. And while all of us have been struggling with dealing with the pandemic and the guidance and the regulations surrounding the pandemic, OSHA has really operated behind the scenes to take, I would say, a really hard line in some cases against business that don't exactly make the front page of the newspaper. So it's one of these things that happens beneath the radar while the legislature does the work that tends to make the headlines in your local paper. But OSHA had some pretty serious rulemakings in process dealing with temporary COVID-19 standards and what would later become infectious disease standards that would be more permanent. we generated 1,600 comments from businesses across the state, which is really just unheard of. And the reality is we were able to get these regulatory proceedings more into the public sphere and get legislators tuned into them by virtue of the fact that we were able to comment with such frequency into OSHA, and those comments usually copied and CC'd legislators. The other issue was with respect to employer knowledge and penalties. And the employer knowledge rulemaking was really meant to set sort of strict liability standards on businesses for workplace health and safety issues. And again, because these were beneath the radar, we generated about 1,100 comments into OSHA. And I think we at least had the impact of drawing this out a little more and getting more business-friendly regulation in place. I'm not saying that these regulations will end up being business-friendly, but they were certainly came a long ways from where they started. And so much of that had to do with the impact of OSCC alerting its membership in Roseburg, up the I-5 corridor, across 84 and 20 into Eastern Oregon, Southern Oregon, and basically getting all of business on the same song sheet for something, again, that was really happening below the radar. So I just, those are just some cases in point to where I feel the value and the strength of OSCC just continues to grow. Again, I would like for the next iteration of OSCC to really be how we impact elections from a grassroots perspective. Let me talk a little bit about the legislature in 2021, and both from a process standpoint and from an issue standpoint. From a process standpoint, there is no question in my mind now that we are going to move to a virtual session. I think that there was probably some thought just a handful of weeks ago that we could conceivably start to meet in person and carry on a legislative session as we had for, traditionally done by meeting in the Capitol. I don't think that that's, I think we've been disabused of that notion now. The issue of meeting virtually, I think, has some advantages to business and some disadvantages. The advantages are we can all tune in to legislative hearings, just like we're tuning in to this discussion right now. And so you don't have to go through the rigmarole of, taking a day off work, coming to Salem, finding parking, trying to find your meeting room, signing up for testimony, all of that. All of that is, you're sort of relieved of all of those burdens, and you can just do it from your desk in Douglas County. And so I do think that it brings some advantages to bear for outlying areas to be able to participate more fully in the process. That is one thing that I hope we're able to take advantage of. The second thing that I think is a notable advantage is it really reduces, I would say, the hustle and bustle of a traditional session where we are fighting myriad issues at the same time. Things kind of slip through the cracks because you just can't cover all the fronts at all times. I think that meeting remotely will likely have the effect of limiting the issues that the legislature focuses on, because in order to carry out an effective session remotely, committee hearings are going to be probably a little more infrequent. They're likely not going to be overlapping. And so just some of these logistics tend to lend themselves to the committees being spaced apart more, perhaps more focused on core issues. Courtesy hearings will likely not be a thing this year, and probably ancillary issues will probably drop by the wayside. And so there will probably be more of a focus on big ticket issues that everybody will have eyeballs on. And I think that that's a good thing, because sort of reducing the field of play tends to let us get more involved in those issues, and I hope achieve better outcomes. And so those are some of the advantages that I see of a virtual session. The disadvantages that I see, and these have been what I've noticed over the past couple virtual special sessions, and that is the decision making really starts to whittle down to just a handful of legislators, even more so than usual. Typically, legislative decision making really resides in the hands of your leadership and your key committee chairs. And so I typically think, in a 90-person legislature, you've probably got 15 to 20 people making decisions and 70 people just trying to get noticed and fighting like heck just to get their viewpoint heard. And so that 15 to 20 and your core decision makers probably is going to get whittled down even more as this session unfolds remotely. The other thing that I have observed that I don't think is necessarily a good thing is that the decision makers tend to be a little more insulated from public pressure, from opposing views, and the gatekeeping to get to your decision makers, I think, is a little more rigorous than during the course of a session when you can pull people off the floor, you can visit them in their office, you can arrange for hallway visits. There's just more of a fluid nature to the communication. Now you've got to get through gatekeepers, you've got to schedule organized meetings, and people will have limited time and availability when they're conducting these sessions, from their homes. So I don't like that because just the full public discourse around issues gets limited. And I think decision makers can pick and choose who they hear from. And I hope that that is an issue that gets resolved in 2021 because I've noticed that it is a problem. So the decision making really gets consolidated into just a handful of people, and those people get more insulated. And I don't think that that's a good development. So I hope that there are remedies, and certainly expect that that will be addressed at least in part. So then moving forward to the main issues. Remember, every session coming off a census is going to be focused on redistricting. And, that is political blood sport because if you're in the majority, I think you want to maintain your majorities. I think most people are very mindful of the redistricting that happened in 2000, I think it was, or the 1990s with Phil Kiesling, and it was a disaster for Democrats. It allowed, basically Republican majorities for 15, 16 years. And so you saw that process migrate to more of a partisan process in 2001. The 2011 session basically just tinkered around with the 2001 redistricting and basically affirmed it. And so a lot of those partisan advantages were built in and reaffirmed. So it'll be real interesting how the 2021 redistricting goes, because all the field meetings and because that redistricting committee spends a lot of time in various communities around the state, taking testimony, at least trying to understand communities of interest and keeping them together. That type of field work is probably not going to happen. And, there is a drop dead date. You've got to have that plan done by June 30th. Otherwise, the Secretary of State takes over, and, it will have a new Secretary of State. She will submit a plan that basically has to pass muster with the Supreme Court. And so we are looking at a process that I don't know how it's going to work, but I can tell you it is the primary focus of every session that comes at the heels of a census. And so we're in that session right now. I suspect that there will be issues related to revenue more than most sessions, because the economic shutdowns have had impact on revenue growth. And although we've seen the revenue growth come back with just an absolute roar from the initial shutdown, we're entering a phase of new shutdowns, and I don't really know what that portends. General fund revenue, it turns out that our economy is far more resilient than the economists thought or gave credit for early on. So general fund revenue seems to be strong. Lottery is a different story, because when you shut down restaurants and bars, the machines are not being used, and so lottery revenue and everything that depends on lottery revenue is going to be far more tenuous. So right now, and then I would also say the CAT tax, which was passed in 2019 to support schools, has only generated a fraction of the income that it was anticipated to. So I'm going to say expect revenue issues. Expect proposals from the Oregon Health Authority on employer assessments to fund Medicaid. I think there's going to be an effort there. I think as you're going to see a committee hearing on Wednesday to talk about the CARES Act and basically separating Oregon out and eliminating any state tax benefits from the federal CARES Act. I think that that's going to be a concern. That's effectively a $200 million tax increase. So I would take a look at revenue issues is really, that's where my radar is going to be up, particularly on revenue issues that do not require a 3/5 vote. And it used to be, I'd say back in the good old days, where most revenue issues were determined to require a supermajority to actually pass. That is only the case in a fraction of tax issues now, because that law, it was actually a ballot measure, has gotten whittled down to just the bare bones now. So the possibility of passing revenue that affects business bottom lines with just majority votes, those opportunities have really multiplied over the years. I would take a look at those. There will probably be issues with respect to wildfire response and funding. As you're well aware, issues of racial justice and equity are issues, and I don't know exactly what form those are going to take, whether it's additional police reforms or how we're funding or delivering agency services, but I do expect that that will be a significant issue set in the 2021 session. Of concern to business, I think issues around liability stemming from COVID regulation and how business has stuck to the guidance, and if there are liability concerns for business and how we can shield business from some liability concerns if we're operating in the scope of guidance, that will be a key issue. I don't expect to see that addressed in any short session or a special session between now and January. I do expect that that would likely be a January 2021 issue and beyond. So that's just a little primer on what I think will be relevant issues in 2021. And, you know, unlike a lot of sessions, I don't have the clearest view on what the big priorities are other than just those that I've outlined. We're going to have to ramp up pretty quickly and scan the horizon given our limitations because we're not, you know, in the milieu as we are in years past where we know what's being introduced. A lot of that is being done by individual legislators who we don't have the access to that we typically had. So there's going to be a significant learning curve in ramping up getting into 2021 to make sure that our business communities have good information about what's out there that is relevant and what we can have impact on. And, you know, it's going to be incumbent on us to give you that information and how you can respond to, you know, basically protect Main Street interests. So I'm going to stop there. And Alan, I'm happy to take questions at this point or let Chris make his presentation.
Yeah, it looks like, I think thank you very much, Jill, for your presentation there. It looks like it was quite thorough on the questions that came through, so thank you very much for delivering that.
Quite welcome.
All right, thank you. All right, so up next to discuss business matters of importance on the national scene in 2021, we have Chris Eyler. Chris is Executive Director of the Northwest Region in the Congressional and Public Affairs Division at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. He represents the states of Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, Washington, and Wyoming, and helps develop and implement the Chamber's grassroots, legislative, and political activities in the area. He works closely with state and local chambers and members of Congress in this region to further the legislative priorities of the Chamber and business. Early in his career, Chris served as staff counsel on the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. He served as a legislative assistant handling healthcare, education, Social Security, and telecommunications issues for 2 former senators and a member of the House. Chris received a BA in History and Political Science from Miami University in Ohio and a law degree from the University of Oregon. Please welcome Chris Eyler. And Chris, let me go ahead and get you set here.
Great, thank you, Alan. Am I able to share my screen as well?
You absolutely are. Let me go ahead and get that set for you. And it should let you now.
It's not letting me. Oh, there we are.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Alan. As Alan said, my name is Chris Eyler. I'm the U.S. Chamber's Executive Director for the Northwest Region. And as I always do, I would just like to begin by extending my gratitude to Debbie and the entire team at the Roseburg Area Chamber. As I've said numerous times, our local and state chamber partners are some of our most important members. But this year in particular, those partnerships have been tremendously important to us as we have worked both to get information out to businesses across the country on all of the various aid programs available during the pandemic, but also as a source of information to inform our advocacy agenda. So much of what we have been able to do this year and where we have focused our work has relied almost exclusively on the feedback that we have received from our local chamber partners. So thank you, Debbie, and thank you all for supporting the work of your local chamber and the U.S. Chamber. Well, as JL indicated, notwithstanding the fact that we will see a significant change at the presidential level, at the congressional level, this year was not really that much of a disruptive election. In fact, we have seen the majorities in both the House and Senate narrow. In the House of Representatives, right now, in the current 116th Congress, the Democrats have a majority of 232 Democrats to 197 Republicans. As of today, 219 races have been called in favor of Democrats, and 202 races have been called in favor of Republicans. So Republicans are, to the surprise of many, are picking up seats for the incoming 117th Congress. If the current trend continues, with all the outstanding races that have yet to be called, there is the potential that Democrats will have a majority of 221 Democrats to 213 Republicans. So this would be roughly a 15-seat gain for Republicans in the House of Representatives, which is significant since going into the election, many were predicting that Republicans could lose anywhere from 10 to 15 seats. This is also significant because Speaker Pelosi is going to have a much narrower majority to work with. Yes, there's a lot of angst amongst the Democratic caucus right now about what happened and why they lost seats. But we fully expect that the House leadership will largely remain the same. We fully expect that Speaker Pelosi will be reelected Speaker going into the 117th Congress. But given the narrower majority, she's going to have a lot harder time moving a lot more controversial legislation. She won't be able to lose very many votes at all. So this will temper a lot of the legislative activity you see in the House of Representatives. Yes, you're still likely going to see bills that attempt to roll back the Trump tax cuts, enact some parts of the Green New Deal, enact parts of the PRO Act. This is a legislation that was passed in the previous Congress that had a lot of labor provisions of concern to the business community. You're likely to see some fairly broad healthcare legislation move through the House, but it's likely that it won't be as radical as what you would otherwise see if Democrats had a much broader majority. As I said, Speaker Pelosi will only be able to lose anywhere from 7 to 8 votes from her caucus, so it's going to definitely temper the type of legislation that moves through the House. It's also going to make it more likely that you see some type see the occasional procedural vote that Republicans are able to pick off enough Democratic seats in order to move legislation through some various procedural maneuvers that it can make. But as I said, what we have seen in this election is a narrowing of the Democratic majority in the House, which, while you're going to see a lot of the same priorities move through the House that you would otherwise see in a Democratic majority, the scope of those agenda items and how radical they are is going to be tempered significantly by the fact that they simply can't lose as many votes on those types of issues. That being said, how far what is passed in the House is able to go is going to depend almost exclusively on what happens in the U.S. Senate. Again, what we have seen in this election is a narrowing and a potential change in control in the U.S. Senate. Going into this election, Republicans had a majority of 53 seats to 47 Democrats. As of today, 50 of the Republicans will control at least 50 seats in the U.S. Senate, and Democrats will control at least 48 seats in the U.S. Senate. 2 races in Georgia remain to be called. Those are going into a special runoff because no candidate in those elections exceeded 50% of the vote. Democrats, for their part in the elections, were able to successfully defend a Democratic seat in Michigan, and they were able to flip seats in Arizona and Colorado. Meanwhile, Republicans were able to flip a seat in Alabama and then successfully defend seats in Maine, North Carolina, Montana, Alaska, Kansas, and Iowa. Again, what we are looking at right now is Republicans could have a 52-seat majority going into the 117th Congress. This would be 1 fewer seat than they had last Congress. Or if Democrats are successful in the Georgia runoffs, they could potentially have the majority once Vice President-elect Harris is sworn in and would break the 50-50 tie. As for the U.S. Chamber, just as a reminder, the U.S. Chamber does have a very active political program. We do not endorse at the presidential level, but we do endorse candidates at the congressional level. And we place an emphasis on supporting candidates who will go to Washington, D.C. to support pro-growth, pro-business policies, and with an interest in governing. So going into the 2020 election cycle in the Senate, our goal was to maintain a pro-growth majority in the U.S. Senate as a backstop to a Democratic majority in the House and a backstop to a President Biden administration. The jury is still out on whether we will achieve that. As I said, we have to wait and see what happens in the Georgia runoffs. If the 2 Republican senators are able to maintain their seats in Georgia, we are confident that we will continue to have that pro-growth majority that we wanted to see in the U.S. Senate. As for the House of Representatives, there was really no expectation that the House would change party control. So our emphasis in this election going in with respect to the House of Representatives was to encourage more bipartisanship governing and to support more centrist House Democrats. Based on the outcomes of this election, we feel that we have achieved that. We've pushed the House to be more focused on moving bipartisan priorities. And of the candidates we endorsed in the House of Representatives, 16 of the 30 Democrats that we endorsed did successfully defend their seats and win re-election. So what to expect going into 2021? As I've indicated already, it's largely going to depend on how these 2 special runoff races in Georgia turn out. What we know that Joe Biden will be president. We know that the House will be controlled by Democrats. The outstanding question then is who's going to control the U.S. Senate. First, if Republicans retain control of the U.S. Senate, you can largely expect to see kind of a hybrid of what we've seen over the past 2 years, in that you're going to see a lot of executive action coming out of the Biden administration focused on executive actions, executive orders, and administrative actions. A lot of that's going to be focused on, initially at least, undoing a lot of the activity that President Trump did through executive actions over the past 2 years. You're also going to continue to see legislative gridlock on Capitol Hill, and some of this gridlock is going to now extend to nominations. With respect to nominations, we don't expect that there's going to be a lot of the gridlock when it comes to President Biden's cabinet nominations. If anything, it's going to force President Biden to maybe temper the types of people he sends up for cabinet nominations. But we do likely expect to see a lot of gridlock on judicial nominations, similar to what you saw in the final 2 years of the Obama administration, as it's likely that Senator McConnell will not allow many of President Biden's judicial nominations to move through the Senate. Likewise, you're going to continue to see a lot of legislative activity, a lot of what JL was talking about happen at the state level, particularly in blue states. Because there's going to be a lot of legislative gridlock in Washington, D.C., a lot of issues that cannot move through Congress at the federal level likely will move to the state level. So you're going to see a lot of things that we've already seen in Oregon and Washington and California. You're going to continue to see a lot of emphasis placed on state legislatures to pass more progressive environmental, labor, and tax policy agenda. But however, because we now will have a Democratic president who is going to be moving a lot of his priorities through regulatory action, it's likely that you will see a lot of activity coming out of red state attorneys general offices as they seek to block some of that regulatory activity in the courts. The other scenario that we are looking at is where Republicans are not successful in defending those seats in Georgia. And Democrats are able to take control of both the House and Senate, and you have unified Democratic government. In that case, you're going to see a fairly aggressive legislative agenda on the Hill. Now, because you saw a narrowing of the majorities in the House, and Democrats at most are going to control the Senate with a tie broken by the vice president, it's not likely that you're going to see as aggressive or as radical of an agenda as you would otherwise see if they had outright control. But that being said, if they have unified government, expect a fairly aggressive agenda in areas of tax policy, healthcare policy, labor policy, and environmental policy. Where we will see those issues tempered is in the middle. Like I said, Speaker Pelosi is only going to be able to lose 7 to 8 votes on any given issue. And in the Senate, with a 50-50 split, those moderate Democrats are going to become that much more important to the business community's agenda in tempering some of those policies and potentially blocking some of the more radical proposals. Likewise, irrespective of who controls Congress, we fully expect President Biden to continue to have an aggressive regulatory agenda, really focused on rolling back a lot of what happened over the past 4 years under President Trump. Also in Congress on Capitol Hill, you're going to see a very strong emphasis on oversight, looking at a lot. Democrats will want to look at a lot of the things that have happened in all the various agencies over the past 4 years under President Trump. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're likely to see a lot of activity coming out of state attorneys general's offices in red states and Republican-controlled states as they look to push back in the courts on all of the regulatory activity you see coming out of the Biden administration. As for Oregon, the Oregon Congressional Delegation is actually positioned to play a very significant role in a lot of what is going to be happening on Capitol Hill. First, starting with Senator Wyden, he is, depending on who has the majority in the Senate, he will either be the chair or ranking Democrat on the Senate Finance Committee, which is arguably the most important committee on Capitol Hill. The Senate Finance Committee has jurisdiction over tax policy, Medicare, Medicaid, trade policy, and Social Security. So it has oversight and policymaking authority over a sizable, the bulk of federal spending and revenue programs. In the House of Representatives, Representative Peter DeFazio, your member of Congress, will continue on as the chairman of the House Transportation Committee. Transportation and infrastructure, which I will get into a little more in a second, it is positioned to be one of the most important priorities, both for Republicans and Democrats, but also for the business community going into the 117th Congress. And Mr. DeFazio will play a significant role in shaping that policy. Up north in Portland, Congressman Earl Blumenauer, he will be the 5th most senior member of the House Ways and Means Committee. This is the House equivalent to the Senate Finance Committee. It also has jurisdiction over tax policy, a lot of the Medicare program, Social Security, and trade policy. And in fact, he is currently, and I suspect he probably will continue to be, the chairman of the Ways and Means Trade Subcommittee, given the importance of international trade to Oregon's economy. And just one other note, the Oregon congressional delegation did change somewhat this year. Representative Greg Walden is retiring in the Eastern Oregon 2nd Congressional District. This marks a bit of a drop in clout for the Oregon delegation. Greg Walden is the former chair and current ranking member on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. So Oregon will lose a little clout there. But as I noted above, you have 3 members who are very highly positioned to play a significant role in a lot of what's going to happen over the next 2 years, and particularly on a lot of issues that are important to the business community. So what can we expect? So first, keep in mind that even though we just had the election, there's still just under 2 months remaining in the 116th Congress. So there is still work to be done before a new Congress and a new White House is sworn into office. Our focus going into this lame duck session is twofold. First, Congress is currently operating under what is called a continuing resolution. That is what is funding the federal government right now. It expires on December 11th. So Congress is going to need to pass legislation either to extend the continuing resolution and keep funding the government at current levels into 2021, or they're going to have to pass a full appropriations measure funding the government through the end of the next fiscal year. Obviously, our preference is that they pass legislation funding the government fully through the end of September of 2021, which would be the full fiscal year. However, our first priority here is avoiding anything, any type of government shutdown. So if they can't come to an agreement, we hope that they can just simply pass a continuing resolution, getting us into the new Congress and into the new administration. But our preference would be that they clear the deck for the new Congress and the new White House, so that the government is funded through the remainder of the fiscal year to the end of September. The next big priority and our big focus for the next 2 months is getting a phase 4 coronavirus relief package. As we've seen over the past 8 months, this has been a really rough 8 months for businesses. However, what we have seen is what you've probably heard in the press referred to as a K-shaped recovery. Some sectors of the economy have actually been able to recover to something resembling normal. These sectors are largely in the technology, a lot of the retail sector, software services, and financial services sector of the economy. Parts of the economy that are able to work more easily on a remote basis. Those sectors of the economy have been able to recover and are operating at close to normal. However, large chunks of the economy have not been as fortunate. Travel, entertainment, restaurants, hospitality, food services, a lot of businesses, a lot of small businesses that rely on direct contact with the customers and rely on a high volume of contact with their customers. These businesses have continued to struggle. And as we are seeing states like Oregon, Washington, and California, and many other states start to roll back a lot of the reopening and shut down again, these businesses are going to continue to struggle significantly. So we are at a position where we've already waited 5 months for Congress and the administration to get to work on a phase 4 bill. We cannot wait another 3 months for a new Congress and a new White House to come in to get sworn in. We want Congress to take steps now to pass a phase 4 bill to assist businesses. Our priorities for the phase 4 package, there are 5 general categories. Support, first and foremost, support for small and mid-sized businesses, providing liability protections for businesses as they reopen and as they continue to do business during the pandemic. Support for childcare and schools as they reopen or as they continue on in remote learning. more federal aid for unemployment and job training, and federal aid for state and local governments. Of these, the two most important really are support for small and mid-sized businesses and liability protections. With respect to support for small and mid-sized businesses, as you recall, in the CARES Act that was passed back in March, it created the Paycheck Protection Program, which is a loan program that converts to a grant for businesses that continue to pay their employees and pay operating expenses during the pandemic. We are urging Congress to both extend this program and expand it and provide for additional PPP loan funding. For a lot of businesses have already exhausted their initial Paycheck Protection Program loan. We want to enable those businesses to take out a second Paycheck Protection Program loan. We want to see the forgiveness process streamlined and simplified. Most Paycheck Protection Program loans, the average Paycheck Protection Program loan, I should say, is coming in at $105,000. What we would like to see is loans of $150,000 or less, basically presumed to be forgivable. What we're asking Congress to do is pass a simplified forgiveness process where essentially after filing a very simplified declaration of how they spent that PPP funding, those loans would be more or less presumed forgiven. We also would like to see the Paycheck Protection Program opened up to all nonprofit organizations. Right now, the statute limits Paycheck Protection Program loans to 501c3 and 501c19 nonprofits. That excludes many of our local and state chamber partners who are organized largely as 501c6s, though a number are also organized as 501c4s. We want to see the PPP loan program opened up to all nonprofits so that our local and state chamber partners can also access these funds and continue keeping their doors and operations open during the pandemic. With respect to liability protections, what we're asking for here is a limited safe harbor for businesses that continue to operate and continue to remain open to some extent during the pandemic. What we're asking for here is we want it to be temporary. These are not permanent protections, and they are targeted at coronavirus claims. And specifically what we're asking for is protections for businesses that follow public health guidance coming down from CDC, OSHA, and state and local public health officials. If businesses are following those guidelines, if they're taking steps to operate safely, we feel that they should be given temporary protection from lawsuits. Of course, if a business is engaged in willful misconduct or gross negligence, they shouldn't be able to avail themselves of those protections. But if they're making a good faith, concerted effort to follow public health guidelines, we feel that they should be given a temporary protection from lawsuits and not have to face the fear of being sued by someone who simply claims that they were exposed to coronavirus at a place of business. With respect to support for childcare and K-12 education, schools in particular are having to take on a lot of new expenses as they engage in remote learning. And then as they reopen, they have to incur added expenses as they implement public health guidance with respect to social distancing, PPE, and other health measures. This is money that schools and particularly childcare facilities do not have. So we are asking the federal government to come in and provide assistance to help these schools and childcare facilities open up and open up safely. On unemployment, at the end of the year, federal unemployment benefits expire. We're asking the federal government to extend those unemployment benefits in addition to provide some additional assistance to employees who are going to, in all likelihood, remain out of work during the current spike in the pandemic. And then lastly, a lot of states are starting to run out of money, or if they have not already run out of money, and because sales tax and other tax revenues are not coming in because of the slowdown in the economy caused by the pandemic, we are asking the federal government to come in and help states replace some of that lost revenue due to declining tax receipts. Beyond the coronavirus, looking a little further down the road to the 117th Congress, when the new Congress comes back into session, Coronavirus will continue to be a top priority until we get past the pandemic, but there are going to be a number of other issues that are going to come up, and as they come up, one of the things that there is broad agreement on, irrespective of party, is that there's going to have to be some sort of stimulus package passed in addition to the phase 4 legislation I just talked about. The one area where there is broad agreement, even in under normal circumstances, is that the US's infrastructure is crumbling. As this slide indicates, the American Society of Civil Engineers grades the US infrastructure at a D+ and estimates that we would need an investment of $4.5 trillion to get to a B by 2025. Our hope is that members of Congress and the leadership and President-elect Biden resist the urge to take up more ideological-driven agenda items, such as rolling back the tax cuts, or Green New Deal, or healthcare, and focuses on what can be done in the short term. And in our conversations with Republicans, Democrats, as well as the Biden transition team, is that there is broad agreement that something can and needs to be done on infrastructure. So we are focused on urging members of Congress to move early and move dramatically on passing legislation that will make this type of investment in our infrastructure, both to get it up to bring our infrastructure into the 21st century, but also to provide that needed stimulus that the economy is going to need as we work to come out of the pandemic. And then lastly, even though we are barely 2 weeks from the last election, it's never too early to think about the next election cycle in 2022. Coming up on 2022, what we're looking at is a scenario very similar to what we saw in 2020, in that Republicans will be defending more Senate seats than Democrats. In 2022, what you see is 21 Republicans are in cycle versus only 13 Democrats. However, one thing to keep in mind is that those Republicans are largely running in states that were won by President Trump in 2022, and those Democrats who are in cycle are largely running in states won by President-elect Biden. There are also, so far, 2 senators, Richard Burr of North Carolina and Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, who have announced that they will be retiring. There's also some question about whether Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin will be himself retiring, or if he'll be standing for re-election. But as I said, largely what you're looking at is a situation where Republicans are running in red states and Democrats are running in blue states. And even though there are 34 senators in cycle, the potential for a significant shift in the majority one way or the other is going to be fairly limited. In the House, it's far too early to really say which way the winds will blow, but because this is, we just went through the 2020 census, there is going to be some shift and some redistricting across the nation. Here in the Northwest, given depending on the outcome of the census, which we'll likely hear more about early next year, it's possible that we will see 2 new members of Congress, or 2 new congressional districts added in the Pacific Northwest, one in Montana, which currently only has 1 member of Congress, and then potentially an additional member of Congress in Oregon. How those seats are drawn, or how those districts are drawn, is left to the states. So it's hard to say how those districts will be drawn in either state. So with that, again, I just want to thank Debbie and Alan for having me on today. Hopefully we will be back to something resembling normal in the foreseeable future, and I will actually be able to come down and visit with you all in person. But until then, feel free to reach out and have me come back on and talk about what the U.S. Chamber is focused on as we get a little more clarity on how things are going to shape up for the 117th Congress. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. think you're still on mute, Ellen. All right, try to unmute yourself. There you go.
Perfect. Thank you. The power has been passed back. I appreciate that. Thank you very much for your time. Looks like I don't have any questions that came up, so thank you as well for being thorough. And again, thank you both, Chris and JL, for sharing your valuable insights about what we may see legislatively in 2021. And on behalf of all of us at the Chamber, thank you for the information and support that you provided the Chamber staff on a variety of public affairs matters. I'd also like to thank Pacific Power again and Sam Carter with Pacific Power for sponsoring today's meeting. As I mentioned earlier, this is our last membership meeting of 2020. As you've no doubt seen in a membership email or our last newsletter, our typical annual awards dinner will not be happening in January. So please mark your calendars for March 18th, 2021. This is the date the Chamber has set aside for its annual celebration of business, awards presentations, and annual membership meeting. We are hoping our programs and events will be in person. We are currently planning 3 events on that day, breakfast, a lunch, and a casual dinner. 1, to provide our members with an experience that meets their time and financial needs, and 2, if we still have restrictions in place, to be able to get together in smaller groups and maintain whatever physical distancing mandate is required. So look for more detailed information early next year. This also means the Chamber is currently accepting nominations for our Businesses of the Year, male and female First Citizen honors, and other recognitions. The nomination forms are on the Chamber website, and they are in the Chamber's November-December Business Perspectives e-newsletter. If you have any challenges finding those nomination forms, please call or email Debbie at the Chamber, and she'll be happy to get them for you. Finally, we all know how hard all of our local businesses have been hit already in 2020. This coming Wednesday will bring even more challenges with the statewide 2-week freeze beginning. So just a reminder and a plea as we enter the busy holiday season to please, please, please shop local, dine local via takeout and drink local, again, via takeout. Our local businesses, very survival and the lifeblood of this community depend on all of us keeping our dollars here this holiday season and beyond. Thank you again to our presenters, sponsor, and our virtual attendees for joining us today. Hope you all have a great day and a happy Thanksgiving and a joyous holiday season. Be safe and stay healthy. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.